Welcome to Ponchatoula Live, the show where we make it easier for you to connect with the people of Ponchatoula. I'm your host, Parker Layrisson, and today I've got a terrific guest. This is basically one of my lifelong heroes, one of these guys that's 4 or 5 years older than me, which means in Ponchatoula, I was always looking up to him, figuratively and literally. He's a good bit taller than me, but he was excelling on the sports field, and whether I was at St. Joseph or PHS or just out and about in the community, we were running with similar gangs, but I was always with the little brother gang to his big brother gang. And now he's a dynamite community leader. This is the current president of our Chamber of Commerce. He's a local business owner, a family man, one of my brother Bree's, good buddies, just an all-around great guy. So with no further ado, I bring to you Sean Benoit, owner of Stray Cats and president of the Ponchatoula Chamber of Commerce. Sean, thanks for being on the show.
Anytime. Appreciate you inviting me.
Why don't we kick things off with you just telling our viewers a little bit about yourself?
All right. Well, so I wasn't born here in Ponchatoula, but my family moved here when I was 8 years old. So I've been here about 42 years. Went to St. Joseph, graduated from St. Joseph, moved on to Ponchatoula High, graduated from there, and took a longer track, but eventually graduated from Southeastern.
Well, you say a longer track. I bet it wasn't as long as Bree's. I'll never forget. We were at a golf tournament one time, and my dad and Bree were, around the clubhouse at Oak Knoll, and Dr. Randy Moffett, the old president of Southeastern, came up, and Dad was introducing him and Bree. And Bree told him something like, "Oh yeah, Dr. Moffett, you were my fourth president." He got to rattling off how many he'd been through. Bree, was a full-time cop and part-time student the whole time, so it took him about 12 years. He did finally graduate like you, but I don't know if he's got the record, but it's a tough one to beat there.
He probably got a high one there.
Well, let's get back. You mentioned you move up here at 8, so very much a little boy. Where'd you come from? Where's your family from originally?
We were from the Jefferson Metairie area.
Okay.
I am the youngest of 9 kids.
Holy moly. So, when you say St. Joe, y'all were real Catholics, 9 kids, yeah.
That's a fact, yeah. So, and most of my brothers and sisters still live. So being the youngest, being 9, I mean, there's age ranges. I have a sister that is the hardest way to keep track of their ages is that I have my third oldest sister, or second. No, she's my second. Anyway, she's 20 years older than me. And then I have another sister who's 10 years older than me. So that kind of helps me figure out the ages and the gaps.
Yeah, those are kind of your mileposts to help you keep up with it. But we have less than half of that. We have 4 boys, but there's a big gap. I think it's 18 years oldest to youngest. But Bree and I are right there tight in the middle. We're 18 months apart. So we were kind of fighting over everything. Well, so y'all come up here, you move, from kind of the city area or Jefferson Parish to Ponchatoula. What was that like at 8? Leaving, I know Jefferson then wasn't like it is now development-wise, but neither was Ponchatoula. So you were really moving to the country. What was that like as a little boy, back in the 80s or whenever that was, to come up here at 8 years old?
It was kind of a culture shock. I mean, we were, like you said, wasn't as busy back then. So, we ran the neighborhood as, even at that young, my group of friends, we had our bicycles and we rode all over each other's houses. The old saying that, be home for when the lights, came on, that was us. You drive, 6 blocks to the snowball stand or the grocery store, whatever. Well, just couldn't cross the highway. Don't cross the highway.
Right. It's funny you mentioned that because I saw this morning, Andy Duvick, who was in between us, I guess, at St. Joe, but it's been like a big brother to me. I've known him my whole life. And you see these guys, and I saw him, I was out walking the roads and he was in his truck, and it takes you back to riding, bikes with him as kids. Cause that was just what we did. And Ponchatoula was so, rural and small back then. That was really common. You don't see it as much these days.
No, we, growing up, we lived out on Adams Road. And I will tell you this, we rode our bikes in the town.
Wow.
We didn't ride so much on 22, but we'd take the back roads and we would come into town so we could go play, some pickup basketball, or we go to JC Park and play a little pickup baseball, or things like that, and you wouldn't even,
Yeah,
I
I
wouldn't
mean,
even
these
dream
days
of it
that would
now
be,
with
people would be calling OCS on your mom if they saw a kid riding over Highway 22 bridge. But yeah, you're right. I guess you take Hoffman Road and all that back channel, and you're here. That was all country road back in the day.
Oh, definitely.
Well, who was your crew? Who did you run with? I mean, my St. Joe gang still gets together, camps out once a year around Christmas. So I know it can be a tight knit group, but who were you running with back then? Who were your pals when you were a little kid?
So back then we were, at St. Joseph. It was Jason Foster,
Oh
uh,
yeah,
Brad Barner, Jay Adams. Shoot, I'm trying to think of them all. But we had, we ran back and forth. So we had
yeah,
some of the grade above us and grade below us, especially with some of them. Like Jason and Jay were brothers.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
we talked about this earlier.
yeah.
Miss Shirley and Mr. Darrell, that was the house.
No, that was many a Saturday mornings. I woke up in Justin's room, and you were down there with Jason and Jay, and it was. I mean, they had so many kids, and what's kind of cool about Ponchatoula is, Mr. Darrell's brother and my dad were best friends when they were little kids.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of I grew up hearing about, the Adams gang back then and dad's experience out there, and then we had our own, thing, and y'all were there with your class. So it's kind of neat because we'll take newcomers kind of like you were back then and fold it in with these. I mean, you met, Burners. The Burners have been around here forever, and what a great family they are. Jason Foster, his, so all these families you mentioned and kind of have these shoot offs. Brad Burner's little brother Corey used to run with us. Jay Adams' and Jason's little brother Justin with us. Jason Foster didn't have any brothers that young, but his little cousins, the Poche boys, ran with us. And it was kind of, y'all were like a big school of fish making your way through town, and we were the little guppies kind of following. Very cool. So I know y'all played a lot of sports back then. What sports were you into?
I played football and basketball. We grew up at St. Joseph. We only had basketball. So
Right.
if you really wanted to play sports other than rec ball, that was the way to go. And then football. And then actually I got into pole vaulting when I got to high school.
Oh, cool. I want to ask you about that, but let's start at the beginning with the St. Joe days, because I'm keenly interested in who your coach was. We talked about the Burners, and Mr. Mutt Burner was my coach. He was an amazing mentor. Now my teammate, the best player on our St. Joseph basketball team, Ben Perrin, is now coaching the kids over there. So who got you started in your era coaching at SJS?
When I got there was Mr. Buddy Pugh.
Oh, what a great man he is.
He was coaching the boys and the girls because he had Jeff and he had Deborah on the girls' team. So he was double dipping. And so he had his hands full there. And
Mr. Buddy was a heck of a player. He and my dad were both in the Pistol Pete movies as kind of partners, if you will. They were the referees in the Pistol Pete game, and it was filmed, of course, right here, at this junior high, the old high school gym. And what a great man. Let's give him a shout out. Mr. Buddy Pugh, you're definitely one of Ponchatoula's finest, and it's cool to hear you mention him on the show, Sean, because he's one of my heroes.
You always forget about, you go so long ago, but, so that's some of the guys, that the men that when you were little influenced you and made you realize, what you needed to do to be good, not just in sports, but as a person.
Right, absolutely. Isn't it weird now? And now you're that guy in the community. Your boy's older, so you've kind of run the gamut from St. Joe dad and coach and all that to now, owning your own business, running the Chamber of Commerce, stuff like that. And so we've got a comment here, showing you some love I want to share. Mark Verbois at PHS. He's speaking of basketball, the director of basketball operations out there and one of their assistant coaches. He says he'll always remember the first time seeing you at Wall Street in Hammond when he started college. And he was thinking that you were related to Goldberg.
I get that all the time. Everywhere we go. My wife didn't know who he was.
Seriously? Wow.
I had no clue. She wasn't a wrestling fan. We were going places and people were saying it. And she's like, what are they talking about? And when she finally looked him up, she was really surprised.
I'm sure she was impressed, man. I mean, heck, he had a long undefeated streak and football player, wrestler. Yeah. Mark says he's a very appreciative of everything you do for Ponchatoula in our community. So, Mark, thank you for chiming in with that comment. I
Thank you,
think
Mark.
you nailed it. Sean is not a guy who seeks out the spotlight and is not a bragger, or by any stretch. But you certainly deserve that praise. Speaking of praise and heroes, Lester Leroy Satoon says you're his hero. Well, of course, he's a strawberry king. That's a hero. What's the old saying there, Satoon? It takes one to know one. So, thank you for
That's
watching.
That's another house as we got older that we grew up at.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You were probably. I remember when I was a kid. Speaking of heroes, of course, there are many Satoon boys running the roads, but the twins used to camp out at the Strawberry Festival to get the Strawberry Festival poster. Do you remember that? You were probably out there with them. But I was a little kid living across the street, and I remember they used to come over to get money from my dad because he was on their list to get posters. And I just thought that gang was the coolest in the world. I couldn't wait to grow up and do that one day. But yeah, great families. The Satoons are a prime example of that. So we're here, folks, with Sean Benoit. He's the owner of Stray Cats right here in Ponchatoula. He's also the president of our Chamber of Commerce. And we're talking about the good old days, specifically St. Joe. But you mentioned when you got to high school, you played football, which St. Joe didn't have, and you also got into pole vaulting. Now, football doesn't surprise me because, as Mark says, you look like Goldberg, and he was a defensive end. But pole vaulting is a different animal. So let's start with the track and field part of things. How did you become a pole vaulter, and tell us about that?
Well, I was kind of a small kid growing up, and I actually thought I was. So I didn't play football my freshman year, and my sophomore, I saw some of the guys that were playing, and I'm like, I can do it. I can swing it. And I went and talked to the head football coach. He was Sidney Wilkerson at the time, and he's told me, yeah, come on out. And he asked me if I played baseball, and I said, no, sir. And he was like, well, you're going to do track. And I said, well, I guess I'll give it a try. He goes, that wasn't a question. He said, if you're on the football team and you don't play baseball, you are on the track
team. That wasn't a question. I love that. It was a direct.
Yeah.
So you get to track, and I guess you realize, hey, I'm not a sprinter. I got to find something else to do.
Well, it kind of fell in my lap. Back then, we had the Smith brothers and Jeff Crownover were the big pole vaulters who were a year older than me. They didn't really have anybody below them, and they were trying a few people out, and I happened to be standing there, and coach was like, do you want to give it a shot? And I'm like, hey, coach, I'll give anything a try. And so it kind of went from there.
Well, that's cool. Ponchatoula's got a proud pole vaulting history. I mean, we had good vaulters when I was in school, from Heath King and Philip Bougier. But of course, the guy we got to talk about is Coach Dominguez, right? Josh Dominguez was an All-American at LSU. And he actually was the runner-up to the national champion, and I believe tied his height. The only was runner-up because he had more scratches or whatever that y'all call it. Yeah. But so folks that don't know that, we have one of the best pole vaulters, around here in Ponchatoula, and he's giving back through coaching. So you mentioned that kind of track and field angle, meeting Coach Wilkinson. Let's talk about the gridiron. What position did you play, and what was your football experience like at PHS?
I was a defensive back, and as we went along, I kind of started to develop a little bit more. So I started playing some strong safety, and actually, back then it was for the love of the game, let's say. So my sophomore year we were 5-5. My junior year we were 2-8. And my senior year, we were 1-9. However, we never lost to Hammond, so that was always a good thing for us.
You probably take that one win over Hammond over 5, other wins.
Oh, yeah,
especially in that era. Rivalry was real back then in those days.
Oh, it was. It was a big thing. It was, people would get crazy and go mess up football fields or all kinds of different things. But yeah, it was definitely a big rivalry for that.
Yeah, there were a lot of things done in the Ponchatoula-Hammond rivalry when I was a kid. that at the time were described as pranks. And I would learn at LSU Law School were actually crimes.
Yeah, that's
It was
exactly
fortunate that nobody pressed charges. But yeah, that was a different era, and the rivalry was intense. My dad tells a funny story about, speaking of Ponchatoula Hammond. He was a quarterback on the 1959-60 team, and his girlfriend at the time was a Hammond High cheerleader. And he goes, and back then they had some really good players on both sides. They had good records. And long story short, I think it may have been Mr. Bankston, who was a parish councilman, great guy, but he was a beast of a linebacker. His brother actually went on to play in the NFL. But somebody on that team just crushes my dad, as he's running a sweep, into the sideline. And dad kind of comes to, and he's looking up, and he sees the angelic face of his girlfriend. But instead of encouraging him, she's like, "Yeah, get him, stay down." It was like they were not in love on game night. It was Ponchatoula Hammond, a real rivalry. But hey, man, tell me this won't make your day. Coach Wilkinson is watching the show. He says, "Good to see you, Sean." Coach, thank you for tuning in. What a great man and great contributor to the Ponchatoula history.
It was actually good. Last year, he actually came to the, I think it was the Acadiana playoff game.
Oh, really?
We had like a little tailgate where we tried to get some of the old players together, and he showed up. It was good
very
seeing
cool.
him. I don't think I've seen him. It was the first time since, I guess, high school that I had seen him.
Yeah, no, Coach, really big deal. He was the coach when my older brother was in school, and I remember well, how well loved you were here in town and how well respected you've always been. So, Coach, thank you for watching the show. What it says a lot about your character that you're still supporting your players all these years later, by watching, and we thank you for that. We're here, folks, with Sean Benoit, owner of Stray Cats, president of the Chamber of Commerce. And I promise we will eventually talk about those professional, duties, but we're kind of having fun now, reliving the glory years. While we're on the topic of PHS, I love asking my guests about PHS because Ponchatoula historically is a one high school town. Of course, a few people peel off, go into private schools, but that's more of a recent trend. For folks of our age, almost everybody went to PHS. So I love asking about that because some people on this show have come on and talked about Will Ed Butler or AJ Bodker or Virgil Allen. We all had different principals, different teachers, different coaches. So when you were at PHS, what are some things that stand out in your mind? Some people, Coach Wilkinson obviously would be one. You've commented on him, but who were teachers, principals, coaches, janitors, just anybody at PHS that you remember that had an impact on you and kind of helped shape you to become the man you are today?
There were several. We had some really good teachers back in the day. One of them was, I remember Miss Neal was an English teacher.
Yeah.
I think she was my junior year.
Was that Mike Neal's mom? Was that Mike Neal's mom? She became the librarian, maybe?
I think maybe after I left, I think so.
Yeah, she was great. I remember her.
Oh, yeah, she was really good, really into it with the students. Miss Deborah Armstrong was a French teacher. She was awesome.
French teacher, she was amazing.
Oh, yeah. And since playing basketball, Coach Grigas.
Oh, gosh, what a hero he is. Yeah.
He was outstanding, and he was the American history teacher.
Yeah, and, I'm glad you mentioned that because Coach Grigas was well known as a coach. And of course, every girl that went through the school was in love with him. He's a great family man. I had the pleasure of coaching his son, and have done some work with his talented daughter, who's a beautiful and wonderful artist. His wife was my little brother's speech therapist. It's just a great family, top to bottom. But Coach Grigas was perhaps the most talented teacher in the classroom I can recall. He would get so enthusiastic, whether he was talking about Elvis and pop culture or General John Jay, Blackjack Pershing and military. I mean, he was just an incredible teacher. And I think a lot of people want to compartmentalize folks and think that coaches are jocks. And he was. He set records playing ball at Southeastern. But, man, he was a heck of an educator. Did you take his class?
Yeah, definitely it was. I did. And it was funny because we always thought he was a big Elvis fan. Yeah. Because, he always Elvis birthday.
Fan. Yeah.
But he eventually wound up telling us that it was a line from the movie DC Cab.
Really?
Yeah, he said, Gary Busey, he said, I just thought that was so funny. He was like, and I don't work on January 8th because that's Elvis's birthday. He
Oh,
said,
that's
so.
funny. See, I never knew that it was a gag, man. I just thought he
We
was a big
always
Elvis
thought he had
fan.
like velvet paintings at his house and everything,
Yeah.
but
Oh,
it
yeah.
wound
Oh,
up
yeah.
being that. Yeah.
Well, what a great guy. He's and look, heck, he coached every sport in the in the program before he I mean, heck, he's done golf, baseball, basketball, football, and good at all of them. But first and foremost, just a great guy and a great family man. So you had great coaches who were also great educators. Was Mr. Allen the principal when you were there, or was it the end of the Bodker era? Who was
It
running
was,
the show?
beginning, it was Mr. Barker, and then Mr. Berger came in. I want to say maybe my junior year.
Okay.
Um, you know,
So because I was in the last class that Mr. Allen had was his principal. He got promoted to superintendent our senior year. And so I guess our graduation was the last he presided over as the principal. But it's really neat. We've had such a strong tradition of great leaders out there. And it had to be kind of neat to see a changing of the guard because Mr. Bacher was as legendary as Ponchatoula gets, right? I mean, he brought us through integration. He was the principal forever. He was just a beloved man and leader. So you got a taste of that. But then you get to see the next, big shot to fill the big shoes, and that had to be pretty cool.
It was. He was there, and it's just looking back because when you had Coach Thompson was assistant principal. And
Yeah,
he was the one wheeling the paddle.
absolutely. He saved me. I don't think I mean, look, if not for the grace he showed me when we stepped out at pep rallies and otherwise, Lord knows, there probably would be no lawyer Layrisson or scholarships at Tulane.
Yeah, exactly.
He knew when to push you and when to give you a second chance. He was a great educator.
And actually, I always call him Coach Strickland, but Mr. Danny.
Yeah.
He was a football coach when I was there. He was actually taught me free enterprise.
I was going to say, and a heck of a teacher. He taught me to do my taxes. I was working at a Hi-Ho at the time. Did he do that with y'all? I thought that was the best practical advice, teaching kids how to do your 1040 EZ form or whatever.
Definitely.
Yeah.
He was good as well. I mean, and it's just great to see all the ones that moved up. And, I got to see with my son going there and my stepson's there now. Was the ones, some are very few are still there, but to see the students, the people I went to school with that are now running the school.
Yeah. What folks like Mark Verbois, who chimed in earlier, who's making a great impact. Mark and I were schoolmates. He was a couple years behind me, but we were in a key club together. There's a lot of great educators out. Brandy Willie Daniels, who was my classmate, is now one of the administrators, and there's just a ton of them. Jennifer House comes to mind. I guess Coach Drake now, but you're right. It takes a little mental gymnastics to realize that they are now the guard running the show, and all the heroes we grew up with are pretty much retired. Well, we're going to get to your business in a minute, but while we're talking school, you mentioned kind of the long road of college. Tell us about that, because in a bit we're going to ask you about Stray Cats, and Verbois talks about seeing you at Wall Street when he started college. Stray Cats, folks, is going to be a great story, I'm sure. And I know this much, 2 pages of this interesting and long book. But growing up, when you're of a certain age, as you and I are, Sean, it was a different era in many ways. But for your industry especially, because the drinking age was still 18. We were the last state in the union with an 18-year-old drinking age, which means that you could legally start partying at bars in the area, your senior year of high school, if your birthday fell the right way. And for those, that explored, bending the rules a little bit, it could happen earlier. But there was that strip in Hammond with extra innings and Stray Cats and Chevys. And I mean, it was just a really big deal. I don't know that there's anything in Hammond that compares to it now. You've brought it to Ponchatoula, but what was college like for you? And particularly, what were the bars that were kind of hot back then, and what was the scene like? Because I'm sure that influenced your career path.
It got me started. I should say we had Chevys, Stray Cats, obviously. Extra Innings was right there. There was also Mickey's.
Yeah, Mickey's. I forgot about that place. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, one of the ones that got me started, like you mentioned, some people turned 18 in high school, so I did. my senior year, my birthday's in February, so there was Stars, which was on the railroad tracks, which is right across the street from Brady's.
Okay.
It was a small little sports bar on the bottom, and upstairs was a nightclub, a dance club. But that one was going pretty good. But none of them, I think, compared to Chevy's, Stray Cats, and Extra Innings at one time in that one space.
Yeah. It was hopping. And I'm going to go backwards a little bit just because I just saw a comment that popped up. Coach Strickland and our friend Tyra McGarry. Tyra is one of the best guests. Folks, if you would love to watch a great old episode, check on our page here because she gave a great interview. But she says Coach Strickland taught real life skills. And Tyra, you're absolutely right. He really did. And it was neat to see him get the great career he was able to have being principal and all, because he was great in the classroom. So, Sean, we're talking about college and kind of the scene back then. How did you break into it? I mean, eventually you're going to own the bar, okay? But did you come up as a bartender, a bouncer, a bar back? I mean, how did you fall into that line of work? Was it during the college, era or after that or what?
It was. I went to LSU for about a year and a half, and then I moved back home, and I got a job when I came back home being best friends with Jason Foster. His uncle, Mr. Rufus Poche,
Catfish Charlie's. Yeah.
So that was a big one there. And Jason worked there all through high school. So I was.
He was the manager too, wasn't he? Didn't he? He ran it at a pretty young age, if I recall.
He was. He had been there for so long, and that was the thing. Was I was thinking about moving back home, going to Southeastern, and come on, Rufus will give you a job. Mm-hmm. So he did, and he taught me how to bartend. They didn't do it. They didn't have a bar other than mainly make drinks for the tables. But that's where I started learning to bartend, and then it just. From there, bounced the college bars, got jobs there bartending, and I guess they got tired of seeing me on one side of the bar and decided to put me on the other. But then it kind of started from there and just got into it. And I mean, Mr. Rufus taught me a lot about the service industry in general, because I did not only bars, but did some work for Mr. Sam Tallow at one point. I actually ran Lee's Drive-In over there for a while.
Oh, wow. Great restaurant. So, and Mr. Rufus was a prolific businessman. I mean, incredibly successful. That restaurant was just a huge deal. I'm sure that probably helped spark the entrepreneurial spirit, because it's a big difference between working somewhere and deciding I'm going to go own a place. I'm going to take on the headaches, the payroll, the liability, all that goes into that. When did you start to get the sense that maybe that was in your future?
I did it for so long, and I found out that I was pretty good at it. Mm-hmm. So I was always a little nervous, and then finally it came to pass where I was like, okay, am I going to stay and do this, or am I going to move on and try and do the 9 to 5 thing? And it just, I guess God had a plan for him, because then the bar here, God just fell in my lap.
So how'd that happen? How'd it fall in your lap?
Well, so Pete Pinapento,
Mayor of Hammond, right?
He owned the original Stray Cats in Hammond, and he had actually, him and a partner, Don, who they had bought the place. Don was trying to run it, and they're not local, so they felt like they were falling a little behind.
Yeah.
So Don decided that, it wasn't for him. Pete had it. He was about to run for mayor. I happened to walk in and to come have a drink and shoot a little pool, and he kind of had a talk with me, and we kind of worked out a deal, and then it went from there. And that was kind of the thing.
Ponchatoula is a tight-knit community. It's a tough place to do business if you are an out-of-towner without a local partner or local kind of insight.
It is, and I was really fortunate. I was blessed because the locals did come out. When I took it over, it wasn't really, doing much of anything. And when I got it, then the support of people, coming in and coming to give me their business really, surprised me, and it was really delightful for it to happen.
So what is it you love about the job? Because you've been at it a while. You're clearly really good at it. Your place has thrived. anybody in that industry that could survive COVID, has to have, just a solid core. And so, you've been through that valley and back. But what do you attribute your success to, and what do you love about the job?
I think the main thing is, I think in this day and age, people forget about the service part of it, which, like I said, that is what Mr. Rufus taught me, a
Right.
lot about. Without your customers, you don't have a business. So it's about being in there, especially in the bar business, because, and I've said this, and I was just having this conversation the other day, is, I have guys that come in, they hang out for hours at a time.
Mm-hmm.
I have women that come in after work and they might hang out for hours at a time. But I have some men and women that come in, they might have that one drink, or there's two drinks in there for 20, 30 minutes, and then they head out. And it's their decompression after a long day's work. And,
Yeah.
They come in, sometimes they sit by themselves and do their thing. You kind of get a feeling when they want to talk. But sometimes when they'll want to talk, and it may be that they need to get something off their chest, and just to be part of, feel like you're there for them, it builds more than just a customer base. It builds a lot of friends. I have a lot of friends.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're in the relationship business,
Exactly.
which makes sense to me. Like you, I came up through customer service and through local restaurants. For me, it was a high ho. And I was blessed with great bosses and mentors like you had, and the Gazzardo family taught me a lot about that, and I saw some of what you're talking about here. But I think it's helped me in my law practice, right? I mean, when you do business locally, we've had a lot of local business people on here, owners of floral shops and bar rooms and law offices and medical practices and whatnot. But I think that's a central theme, what you've hit on. It's this relationship, because what happens is customers, clients, they become friends, and it's because that connection is real, whether they're just popping in for a drink or two in minutes rather than hours. And clearly, a lot of that has to do with your personality. I mean, one thing I picked up on, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the business wasn't really thriving in Ponchatoula until you showed up and took the reins. It's same name, same place, same building. I'm sure you made changes and improvements, but the big one was you. I mean, people, I think, I've always liked you and warmed up to you. And, there's this stereotype about bartenders kind of being counselors that we all want to talk to, but you make it easy to unburden, oneself. And where do you think those skills came from? Is that something you got from 8 siblings or good Catholic parents, or the wildlife at the Adam's house growing up, fighting 4 other little boys all on a basis, or where'd that come from?
I think it's a combination of it all. I mean, you take a lot of things for granted growing up that you don't really think about. That old thing when you finally have kids and you start, yelling at your kids and you hear your parents' voices
Right.
coming out of your mouth.
Absolutely.
But my parents did a lot. They volunteered big at St. Joseph, and they got to know people. My mom volunteered at the community center with my grandmother, and was there a lot. So looking back on it, you start to realize some things, and just the different people that you don't realize you're learning from as you go along, and teach you. I mean, look.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I remember my grandmother, working, giving out commodities at the community center.
My mom did too. Yeah.
I mean, and they had their little clique, those ladies that loved each other. But I mean, you really you develop so many life skills there, and one is to appreciate what you've got. We all can get whiny and entitled at times, and sounds like you had a really strong family life, and that's a great core. What do you do in this age? Because I know you've done really well for yourself, your whole family, and so you've got children now. How do you ground them? Because I'm sure when you went with mama or grandma to the community center and you saw these poor folks getting, and that cheese was really good, by the way, but they're getting that commodity cheese, and best mac and cheese you ever eat with that stuff. But I just seems to me like nowadays our generation is blessed maybe with a little more affluence, and I mean, you're a business owner, a bar owner, so how are you grounding your kids, so that you can kind of prepare them the way your family prepared you?
I mean, for part of it, I try to do by example. It's
Hmm.
growing up in this small town, and seeing my parents do it, that I realize that I can do it. Is just to help out whoever, maybe in need, and just a little bit of little things, that count. But also, I tell them constantly, when they're feeling down or they're having a bad day, not that their feelings should go unwanted, because it is their feelings, but there's always somebody out there who has it worse than you. No
Right.
matter what you have going on, there's always somebody out there who has it worse than you. So, stop and think: is it really that bad?
Yeah.
You know,
Great point.
can I do something more for other people, because I'm in a situation that I am better off than a lot of people, and so maybe I should just take a step back sometimes and look over the whole picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a moment to highlight some of the things you're doing to lead by example, because I do know whether it's, cooking for our community. It seems like every time there's an event, you're out there in the front lines, whether it's a grill or a gumbo pot or whatever, cooking, cleaning, working. I mean, you're now in your second or third year as president of our local chamber. You're a leader, but you're also a man of action, a doer, for our community. What are some things you've been into to kind of help promote our community, and tell us about that, and maybe a few things you learned along the way?
Well, I mean, having the business in town has kind of opened my eyes a little bit to where we are a small town, and the small business is essential to our little small town, and but it's also essential to all the organizations in town.
Right.
People take for granted all the nonprofits and the good that they do.
Absolutely.
And they need the help from not only the small businesses, but the community and everyone else. So, I try to, do what I can. There's only so much in the pieces of the pie that go around with the sponsor things. But with the chamber, I've realized that, if there's anything that can help our town, it's just promotion of the town itself. Anything to get people to know we're here, to know what we have to offer, just and get them here.
Yeah.
Not just downtown. We focus on downtown a lot because it's a tighter knit group where everything is centrally located. But anything downtown, like with the chamber, since I've been there, they started the Art and Wine Stroll, which has been
That's a great event. Yeah.
it's been very successful. So it highlights our local artists, some of our local entertainers, and it gets people to walk downtown and actually get to look and walk into the shops and see what they
Hmm.
have to offer.
Yeah.
Uh,
And then they're shopping local. They may stop, stop and see you for a daiquiri or a drink. And speaking of that, my big brother Chris Gideon says you have the best pina colada daiquiris on the planet. Chris, I don't want to call you out, but you would know. Chris has had a pina colada daiquiri all over the place. He would know.
oh yeah, definitely. He's constantly coming through the drink.
Chris gave a great interview on the show, folks. So you guys ought to check him out. He's one of the most interesting people this town's ever produced, and he's family to me. But so you're right. You get people here, and I think they're going to love it. And it's so important that folks buy local when they can, because then that business you support, whether you're buying art from Mandy May or a cheeseburger from Trevor or a pina colada daiquiri from Sean, then that person's able to go sponsor the local team. They're able to, have the money to buy jambalaya for poor people when it's time to cook for poor people, or, do these things that local businesses can do. And I mean, hey, they're great chains of the world, but let's face it, they're taking their money and sending it to some corporate headquarters, typically out of state, far from here. So I love your focus on getting them here. But also you mentioned it, downtown's a great kind of crown jewel of Ponchatoula, but it's not the only game in town. There are plenty of great businesses outside. I mean, you and I have downtown businesses, so downtown promotion helps us. When they come down for a Friday afternoon concert, they may walk to your bar afterwards for a nightcap. They'll probably pass my law firm coming and going, depending on where they live. But I think of these great businesses that are kind of hidden in nooks and crannies. And the first one that comes to mind for me is Tommy Cooper and Express Printing. He's this incredibly great printer, the most generous guy in the world that does things for everybody. But his business is hidden kind of out, out off of Sisters Road. But he's part of this Ponchatoula community, right? And the chamber can help promote all of our businesses. And I just want to provide you with a commendation and kudos. Y'all do a great job. I mean, your business expo is awesome. I mean, it's so many events. So with that being said, would you mind telling us kind of what's coming up with the chamber? What are you excited to talk about in terms of Ponchatoula chamber business?
Well, we always have our after hours, which is the first Thursday of the month.
And that's a monthly thing, right? Y'all do that practically every month.
It's after hours. It's usually sponsored by a business, which it's at Brandon G. Thompson's funeral home. Actually, the 8th, this next Thursday.
That's a great business. I just left Brandon G. Thompson's daughter, who works there with him. Our kids were at cross country practice for St. Joe. So great business. The McNeelys and Thompsons are just wonderful family.
Oh yeah. So I mean, we have those where people, the chamber and everyone can get together, do a little networking. There's usually some food and beverages,
right,
just to get to know one another and actually get a chance to get people inside different businesses to see what they have to offer. Last month was at the Strawberry Manor, the new Strawberry Manor building there, and they put on a great spread. If you missed that one was great. But
yeah, I know everybody was excited to see that place. That's a beautiful old, historic home now business.
They did great with that.
But
we also, like I mentioned, we have the Art and Wine Stroll coming up, which
right.
That is going to be October 15th. And then you also mentioned the Business Expo, which will be October 11th. That's coming up too. So
we got a busy fall. You guys are working hard. And speaking of that, you've been on the board. I mean, you're almost at the maximum of the 6 years or whatever is allowed. The last few as president. What's that experience meant to you as you look back nearer the end than the beginning of your service tenure? Are you glad you did it, and what have you learned from serving on the chamber board?
Definitely I am. I'm glad I did it. I met a lot of people, a lot of local business owners and people, and some not business owners. Some just residents that happen to show up and they do come to the events and they do support local. But it's also been great to see that there's an organization out there, to try and help the town and just promote the town, because we need it. It's not just, you take for granted that, especially you and I, we've grown up here, we've been here our whole lives. So, everything that we have here is second nature to us. And anytime something new comes, I know I like to check it out and I like to try and support it because, we want it to survive and for it to thrive here.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's just seeing the people coming from out of town who come, one of the first places they contact is the chamber office.
Right.
And I didn't know that. I had no idea before that, okay, if I'm coming going out of town and want to go see what's going on, that's who I contact.
It's like having an embassy. It's like a great ambassador for the city and a point where people can contact. Well, you've been great here. Thank you so much for sharing your time. I know you're busy as a dad, as a business owner, as a community servant, president of the chamber. And I promise I get you out of here on time. And of course, I got to get to soccer practice too. So we both have honeydew projects to get to and obligations with our kids. But before we go, I just want to ask you, is there anything else on your mind, on your heart, anything you want to talk about at all to share with our viewers before we close out?
The main thing is just remember, Ponchatoula is still a small town at heart. I know that over the years we've grown. And like I said, you and I can see it. Our parents can see it more than anybody. But we still are a small town at heart. So keep that in mind and remember, that there's a lot of heart still in here for the small town feel and small town. So, like we talked about, support your local small businesses because these are the guys that are out there and that are giving back most of the time, not only from their pocketbook when they can, but also out there volunteering and helping to keep the community where it is strong and building. Those are the guys you're going to go to for the little league sponsorship.
Yeah.
Those are the guys. I mean, progress is progress, and we're going to need it. You get the big companies coming in, but like you said, they typically send that off to the corporate headquarters.
Right.
The little guy around here are the ones that they're going to be out there, and those are the ones you're going to go to the majority of the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it was neat as you were saying that and talking about, despite our growth, things are still neat here. I noticed right outside the window to my side and right behind you, two kids riding by on their bikes. And it just made me think there's still some of that Ponchatoula that we grew up with, here. It's still a magical place. And I want to thank you for helping keep it that way. Coach Sydney Wilkinson says, great show, guys. Coach, thanks for sticking with us to the end and for supporting us. And it's really neat to see you have an old player on here singing your praises, and you're still supporting him all these years later. So to everyone else, thank you for tuning into Ponchatoula Live. Thank you to our guest, Sean. And it's been a pleasure. We'll be back here next week, same time and place. Y'all have a great week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Parker.